Welcome to the Radical Imagination. I'm your host, Jim Vrettos. Today, we're welcoming a visionary who's inspired millions in this country and around the world. Through his moral integrity, courage, and spiritual wisdom, this show too has grown as a space for people to help transform and heal the world. We welcome Bishop William J. Barber II, president of Repairers of the Breach and co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign. His new book, We Are Called to Be a Movement, will be published June 9th. On June 20th, the campaign will hold a historic gathering called the Mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington, with over 100 organizations participating. It's focused on the lack of police accountability, voter suppression, poverty, and the voices of the poor. And it's a digital assembly and march because of course, the pandemic. So, Bishop Barber, thank you so very, very much. I know you're doing all kinds of things. That your schedule is so full, and we thank you so very, very much for appearing with us here. And tell us what you're planning on the 20th.
Well, you said something in the beginning, Jim, and I want to hone down on it. You said imagination, radical imagination. Who would have thought when we were led 3 years ago to start the Poor People's Campaign, and then we wrote the Souls of Poor Folks Audit. You remember that, and we did the Poor People's Moral Justice Budget. We did that. Then we did 6 weeks of action. That here in 2020 we would be in the middle of what we're seeing now.
Mm-hmm.
But June 2020 actually fits this moment, and we didn't know when we started that it would be as important. We knew it was important, but even more important, because on June 20th, 2020, at the Mass Poor People's Assembly and Moral March on Washington Digital Affair, we will put a face on what you see in the street and a story of what you see on the street. And we will put an agenda to what is seen in the street. And we will say that this moment is about George Floyd, but so much more. George Floyd was an essential worker that wasn't getting paid enough. George Floyd had been through the coronavirus. George Floyd had lost his job. George Floyd was trying to make it as a person working in low wealth. All of those things impacted his life. And right now, the way systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, denial of healthcare, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism has to be addressed. And there's 2 things we got to do: put a face on it, change the narrative, and build power. We got to mobilize people for the movement who vote now and beyond, and who are willing to engage in direct action, not just for a few times, but whenever necessary to drive on these issues. And June 20th is critical. We've sent out 50 million invites. We have 45 state coordinated committees now, 16 religious organizations, and 100 other organizations. It is important now that we, on June 20th, you join us.
Absolutely. It's the day of reckoning in a sense. And I'm reminded, because we had Susanna Heschel on and Reverend Forbes on the show yesterday, and Susanna brought up that incredible telegram that her father sent to John Kennedy, calling for, quote, a moral revolution. We are in a state of moral emergency. We need the moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. And you're doing that. You're doing that. And in the Israel Times today, Times of Israel, there is an article: declare a state of moral emergency. Indifference to evil is more insidious than evil itself. So we're following in that enormous, great tradition, and can't thank you enough for your leadership and the campaign.
And Rabbi Heschel also said to John Kennedy in '63, he said, America forfeits its right to be worshiped until you do right by the African American. But what we also have to recognize is that we cannot just be about systemic racism to Black people. Yes, Black people, but systemic racism to Latinos, First Nation people. And then we have to connect how systemic racism, take voter suppression, is also connected to the poverty of white people, because the people who use voter suppression and racist gerrymandering to get elected, once they get elected, they stand against healthcare for all. They stand against living wages for all. And Dr. King had told us that every time there's the potential for Black and white people to come together, particularly poor and low wealth, to fundamentally shift the country, then the bourbon class, the aristocracy, sows division intentionally. I believe, Jim, that when people heard Floyd say, "I can't breathe," you got to think about when this happened. Before coronavirus, 140 million people poor and low wealth, 700 people dying today from poverty. As we're talking, people are dying from poverty, not because it's their time to go home to God, poverty. Then you have the coronavirus. Then you have 100,000 people die and dying. Then you find out 60% of them didn't have to die if we hadn't been so inept and so negligent. And then in our face, we see a lynching all the way through, not a part of it, not a distorted picture. A 17-year-old girl stands there like David before Goliath, and she films it. We see every part of it. We hear mama, we hear I can't breathe. We see the life go out, and we see the cop pose like he's over prey. And folks, I think when they heard I can't breathe, began to also say deep down metaphorically, you know, I can't either when it comes to poverty. I can't either when it comes to denial of health care. These workers that are having to go into jobs and face death just to work are saying this something's wrong, something's broken, something's terribly messed up when the state is lynching people on TV. And that's where the fervor is. But we also got to build it and connect it. Because what we can't have out of this, I don't think, is just one bill on criminal justice reform and we leave in place the other interlocking injustices. We need a full transformation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Just to get back to people on the streets, it's an incredibly inclusive, diverse group.
Exactly.
Young people are getting it. They've had it. This is it.
Right.
No piecemeal milk toast sort of reforms. We've got to make this radical transformation. And you're right. We need to learn and educate ourselves and think about this. And that's what the campaign is about too. Nobody has all the answers on this.
Nope.
We've got to set the narrative, which you've been doing for years. And we appreciate it so much.
Many of the folk out there are calling us and saying that a lot of PPC people are in the streets, and people are saying they're going to the website, they're looking at the agenda because they're recognizing the death of Floyd may have got us in the street, but now we're in the street. We got to get in all the suites and other places and have a transformation. It would be a dishonoring of his life to just say get a criminal justice bill when we know that Floyd was also a low-wage worker, when we know he also didn't have health care. What we need is to honor the moral tradition. We need bills that reflect what we promised, establishment of justice. And this is going to be good work, hard work. I think we're in mourning. That's what people reacting, but it's not. But for me, mourning is the hope, because what would be worse is to have a society where people saw things and didn't mourn and didn't protest, because that would mean they had given up on the society and they believed that nothing could happen. When I see folk crying and screaming and marching and singing and saying, you know, no justice, no peace. And some of them are saying forward together, not one step back. Some of them are singing, somebody's hurting our brother. It's gone on far too long. We won't be silent anymore. Even through the tears, that's the level of hope, because it is saying we as a remnant that has said we're not ready to give up. But it also means they understand that this democracy can die too.
Absolutely.
And this democracy can fall apart. And this is the moment that we have to decide, can America be what she's promised?
The energy is there, and that's why the campaign is so important for people to get on board and provide the structure and organization and the energy and the moral commitment that we can proceed and go forward. And that's what you're doing.
June 20th, 2020, and also this coming Monday, we're calling for a national day of fasting. Fasting and mourning. And 5 o'clock, everybody take 9 minutes and be still, lay still, sit still. And then at 5:10, we're going to read a litany of commitment to say we need America to fast or to stop systemic racism. We need America to stop accepting its systemic poverty among 140 million people. And then in that litany, we're going to say, and we are committing our lives, for our rest of our lives, to this work. And if we knew that we only had 48 hours left to live, you know, because when you get coronavirus, it could be 48 hours and you're on a ventilator.
Right.
Many of us are disciplining every morning and asking ourselves that question. If I knew I only had 48 hours to live, how would I use my last breath? What kind of world, what kind of justice would I fight for? I may live another 48 hours, but this is the moment to say, with every breath I breathe, just like Floyd, with every breath I breathe. It's amazing to me, one thing that's so glorious in his death, that I hate the death, but he wouldn't stop talking.
To the very end.
And he wouldn't stop protesting. And we can't stop protesting. To the very end, he was talking about love, and he was protesting what was happening to him. Mama, I love you. I can't breathe. He was protesting. And it's time for this entire culture, whether it's poor women or poor men or poor children, or it's the Apache Nation, or it's Latino, or it's sick people without health insurance, to protest. I can't breathe, and I'm going to push back because I know I ought to be able to breathe. I ought to be able to live.
Bishop, we're in this for the long haul too. I'm with you. The Radical Imagination, we're here for you. Listen, I know you got so many other things to do, people see. Thank you so very much, Bishop.
Tell everybody to go to www.June 2020. We need to get thousands upon thousands. I hope 1 million people, that's not hard, on social media will tune in. It's going to be on the big MSNBC platform. And for your audience, David Owello is coming on, who played King in Selma, Jane Fonda, Wanda Sykes, Erica Alexander, who used to be on Living Single, and Living Single and the Cosby Show, and a bunch of other people. And guess what? They're not coming on to speak. They're putting it out on their platforms that they want people to come and hear the voices, change the narrative, and build power. So let's do this together, because it all fits. You can support all of the things. We are in the streets, Black, I'm supporting all of it. And June 20th is a critical part of what's happening in this moment. God, the divine had the imagination and told us. We didn't know, Jim, you were there from the beginning. We didn't know all this was going to be happening. I believe that somewhere in the divine it did, and thank God we've been organizing and we're ready just for this moment. We've been born for such a time as this. God bless you. Take care, my friend.
Thank you so very much. All the best. Take care.